In 2010, a YouTube channel called Boo731 appeared without any particular fanfare. The first video uploaded to it was harmless enough, the creator showing off a homemade Halloween costume, the kind of low-stakes personal content that fills the quieter corners of the platform. It looked like the beginning of a personal blog, someone documenting their hobbies and interests for whoever happened to stumble across it. Nothing about it suggested what was coming. The channel then went quiet for nearly a year. When the creator came back, everything about the content had changed. The video he returned with was titled "My Stalker," and it opened in a parking lot at an undisclosed location, with text on screen describing a situation he had been dealing with that had pushed him to the point of needing to document it. What followed was recorded footage of a confrontation between him and the person who had been following him. A conversation that is deeply uncomfortable to listen to, not because of any aggression or violence, but because of how clearly it illustrates the gap between two people's understanding of the same situation. The creator addresses the man directly and without any ambiguity, making it clear that his behavior is unwanted and deeply unsettling. He explains that being followed from one train car to another, and then all the way to his vehicle, is unacceptable.
Wants to be friends with you.
Well, I don't want to be friends with you. I don't know how else to say it. But I'm plainly saying it to you. I don't want to be friends. There's nothing you can do to convince me.
But why?
Because you make me uncomfortable. Because I don't want to be near you. Because you touch me, you talk to me, and I don't like it.
But what makes you uncomfortable?
You do. Your mere presence. You followed me my car a lot. How does that not make me uncomfortable?
He also tells him that their previous conversations were never something he wanted to continue. Although he remains calm throughout the exchange, there is a noticeable firmness in his voice, the tone of someone who has set these boundaries before, only to see them ignored. Rather than arguing or raising his voice, the creator speaks with quiet confidence, carefully explaining why the man's actions have crossed the line. His message is simple: the attention is unwanted and it needs to stop. It is evident that this is not an impulsive reaction, but the result of repeated encounters that have left him increasingly uncomfortable. The stalker, however, responds in a way that suggests he genuinely cannot understand why his efforts to build a connection are being rejected. Instead of acknowledging the creator's concerns, he challenges nearly every boundary that is established. Whenever one point is firmly closed off, he immediately searches for another way to justify his behavior or continue the conversation.
Okay, so with that in mind, why don't you give me a chance? I can.
Because I'm not giving you a chance because you're Filipino.
No. Why don't you give me a chance? Not being a...
You being a Filipino doesn't have anything to do with it. You being gay doesn't have anything to do with it. I don't care. I just don't like you, your presence. You make me uncomfortable. A Filipino friend doesn't make me uncomfortable. My gay friend doesn't make me uncomfortable.
Well, tell me, what makes them not make you uncomfortable?
At one point, he openly admits that he cannot stop himself from following the creator. The statement is striking because it is not presented as an apology or an admission of wrongdoing. Instead, he offers it almost as an explanation, seemingly expecting that his inability to control the behavior should make it understandable or even acceptable.
The situation was I was a girl and you were a guy following around, there would be police all over this place. You would be in jail. Do you think that's true?
I know.
Okay, so the situation is you're following me, whether I'm a girl or a guy. You're following me from train car to train car to my car. It's the same thing. It's just a little bit harder to prove in a court of law.
Well, you're an expert because you work at law. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm really sorry. You're the expert and you work at law, so But I can't help myself not following you. For some reason, I can't.
The exchange highlights a troubling disconnect. While one person is clearly expressing fear and demanding distance, the other appears unable or unwilling to recognize that those boundaries must be respected. The creator uploaded a second video shortly after, this time capturing the behavior directly on camera rather than describing it, making it impossible for anyone watching to dismiss what he had been going through as exaggeration. The footage shows the stalker following him through the train, switching cars when the creator switches cars, refusing to take the accumulated weight of every signal being directed at him. Other passengers eventually got involved, with train staff intervening and making it clear that the situation had reached a point where it couldn't simply be left to resolve itself.
You get off the train and somebody sit down. Why are you following him? I don't know. Okay, do you want to wait for the next train? You hold the train up. Step up for a second, sir.
I'm sorry. I'll go.
Well, come up here.
Thank you. Thank you. And serious? Still following me.
Eventually, the creator went to the police. A later update on the channel explained that the videos had been recorded back in 2011 and that involving law enforcement had finally produced the result that months of direct confrontation hadn't. The stalker stopped. He disappeared from the creator's life in the way he should have disappeared much earlier, after the very first time he was told his behavior was unwanted. The channel has been inactive ever since, the story sitting there in those few uploads as a quiet and unsettling reminder that this kind of thing doesn't only happen in films. It happens on trains, in parking lots, and in the lives of ordinary people who did nothing to invite it and had no straightforward way of making it stop. In 2024, a post appeared on the Reddit community r/RBI that began with what sounded like a routine request for help. The person writing explained that they had come across a YouTube channel they couldn't stop thinking about and wanted to know whether anyone else had seen it. The concern wasn't that the videos were graphic or violent, it was that they appeared to document something much quieter and in many ways more unsettling. A man repeatedly filming a woman who seemed entirely unaware or increasingly uncomfortable that she had become the focus of his attention. The channel belonged to someone calling himself Alexander Matthews. At first glance, it looked insignificant, one of countless small YouTube accounts that never attract much of an audience, but the titles of the videos immediately suggested something was wrong. Rather than ordinary vlogs or gaming content, they were labeled with names like, "My first video of the assistant store manager," "She doesn't know I'm still filming," "I think she saw me filming again," and "She told me not to wait until closing." Each upload appeared to revolve around the same woman, a GameStop assistant store manager filmed during her shifts in 2019. The person who discovered the channel wasn't asking Reddit to identify her. In fact, they were careful to stress the opposite. Their concern was how to discuss the situation without bringing further attention to someone who had already, by all appearances, been the victim of unwanted obsession. At the same time, they questioned whether she even knew these videos were still publicly available, and whether leaving them online posed an ongoing risk. It was a dilemma without an obvious answer. Removing attention from the channel might protect the woman's privacy, but ignoring it altogether meant overlooking behavior that appeared deeply disturbing. As more people began examining the uploads, a clearer picture started to emerge. The earliest videos seemed almost mundane on the surface. Alexander walked into the GameStop store carrying damaged trade-in items, attempting to return cracked game cases and broken discs that employees immediately rejected. The exchanges themselves weren't particularly remarkable. Retail workers deal with difficult customers every day, and nothing about those first conversations would have stood out in isolation. What made them uncomfortable was the way they were filmed. Rather than recording the interaction itself, Alexander's camera repeatedly lingered on the assistant manager long after the conversation had ended. The titles framed ordinary encounters as though they represented the beginning of a personal relationship, while the footage suggested something very different. The woman remained professional throughout, responding to him the way any employee would respond to a customer. Yet Alexander appeared to interpret even routine interactions as meaningful. As the videos continued, the gap between those two perspectives became increasingly obvious. In one recording, the assistant manager calmly explains that he can no longer visit the store every day. She tells him there is simply no reason for him to keep returning unless he is genuinely buying something or bringing in legitimate trade-ins. She even tries to compromise, suggesting he limit his visits to once or twice a week. It is a conversation delivered without anger or hostility. She speaks patiently, the way someone attempts to establish clear boundaries while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Alexander doesn't seem to understand those boundaries at all. Rather than accepting what she is saying, he immediately begins negotiating. If he cannot come every day, could he come Friday, Saturday, Sunday? When she repeats that there is no need for such frequent visits, he continues searching for exceptions, treating the conversation less as a refusal than as a problem to solve. Watching the exchange years later is unsettling because the audience already knows something he apparently did not, that boundaries are not invitations to negotiate. Another video captures an encounter outside the store. The assistant manager appears visibly frustrated, asking him why he approached her vehicle and reminding him that she had already told him to stay away. Alexander responds with genuine confusion, insisting that she is angry for no reason, and repeatedly bringing up an incident from weeks earlier, unable to understand why it has changed the way she responds to him now.
So if I come at 8, I gotta do it before 9.
You have to do your process. Yeah, you have to do your trade-ins before 9. I want you in line doing your trades at 8:45.
Okay. All right. Can Tommy in there?
There are moments where her voice rises in frustration, not because of a single conversation, but because it becomes increasingly clear that every attempt to distance herself is simply being folded into the next interaction. The recordings reveal something deeply uncomfortable that many stalking victims later describe. It is not always the presence of explicit threats that creates fear. Sometimes it is the complete refusal to accept that another person's no is final. As Reddit users dug further into the channel, they found additional uploads recorded after Alexander had already been arrested. These were presented as explanation videos. According to Alexander, the events had taken place when he was 19 years old. Rather than expressing remorse, however, he framed his imprisonment as evidence that society unfairly punishes men. He argued that his experience demonstrated, in his words, how a woman can ruin a man's life. That statement altered how many viewers interpreted everything they had already seen. Instead of reflecting on the repeated requests to leave the woman alone, he portrayed himself as the victim. The woman whose workplace had become the setting for months of unwanted attention barely appeared in his account, except as the person responsible for his arrest. Throughout several videos, he also discussed his frustrations with women, relationships, and remaining a virgin, blaming society rather than examining his own behavior. The combination of those beliefs with the footage from GameStop made the channel increasingly difficult to dismiss as merely socially awkward behavior. Eventually, members of the Reddit discussion located court records and additional information explaining why Alexander had been imprisoned. The reality was considerably more serious than the YouTube videos alone suggested. According to those records, after repeated encounters at the store, Alexander allegedly slashed the assistant manager's car tires on 2 separate occasions. He was then caught attempting to damage them a 3rd time. After she reported him to the police, the situation escalated further. He allegedly followed her home. Once there, investigators stated that he entered her garage and used a wooden board to smash her vehicle, causing extensive damage before eventually being arrested. Seen in that context, the earlier videos become far more disturbing. What initially appears to be an awkward customer filming an employee gradually reveals itself as the public record of an obsession escalating over time. The repeated visits, the refusal to respect boundaries, the belief that ordinary customer service represented something personal, all of it points toward a pattern that, according to the later criminal case, ultimately became far more dangerous. The YouTube channel has since fallen silent. No new videos have appeared for more than 2 years, and there is no public indication that Alexander has resumed uploading similar content. Whether that silence reflects genuine change, legal restrictions, or simply a loss of interest is impossible to determine from the available information. The assistant manager has never publicly responded to the renewed attention surrounding the channel, and that is perhaps for the best. People who experience stalking are often forced to relive it long after the events themselves have ended, especially when videos remain online for strangers to discover years later. Like several of the other cases in this collection, what makes this footage disturbing is not what happens in any single clip. It is what becomes visible only when the videos are viewed together. Each recording captures an interaction that, taken on its own, might seem merely awkward. Together they document a steady refusal to accept rejection, a growing fixation, and a perspective in which another person's boundaries simply cease to matter. The most unsettling part is that there is nothing supernatural or mysterious about any of it. It is an ordinary retail store, an ordinary employee doing her job, and a customer who gradually convinced himself that persistence mattered more than consent. The camera, intended to preserve his version of events, ultimately documented something else entirely, a progression that many people recognized for what it was long before he ever did. Mount Fuji is one of the most recognized landmarks on Earth, and every year thousands of people make the climb to its summit, many of them well prepared and experienced, some of them considerably less so. The footage that exists of Tezuka's final climb falls into a category that is difficult to watch precisely because everything that was about to go wrong is visible long before it does, and nothing about what the camera captures suggests the man behind it understood the danger he was in. Tezuka was live streaming his ascent to viewers watching in real time, pointing his phone outward to show the landscape around him. Everything buried under deep snow, the trail slippery and treacherous, the kind of conditions that demand full attention from even experienced climbers with proper equipment. Tezuka had none of that. He was dressed in regular street clothes, not cold weather or mountaineering gear, wearing gloves that were wholly unsuitable for the temperature and terrain, and carrying nothing beyond a pair of trekking poles and the phone he was broadcasting from. He was standing above the clouds on a mountain that rises to 12,390 feet in winter conditions, in clothing that belonged in a city rather than on a snow-covered mountainside. What makes the footage so deeply unsettling is how much of his attention was directed at the stream rather than at where he was placing his feet. The mountain required everything he had, and he was giving it a fraction of that, more focused on what his viewers were seeing than on the ground directly in front of him. The slip, when it came, happened the way these things always do, quickly, without warning, and with no opportunity to recover once it had started. Viewers watching the live stream in real time saw what happened and immediately contacted the authorities. His body was recovered the following day near the 7th station of the mountain, roughly a mile from where he had lost his footing, which gives some sense of how far he fell before coming to rest. The camera containing the footage was not found alongside him. It turned up several months later, recovered by chance, and the recording on it became one of those documents that circulates not because people enjoy watching it, but because of what it illustrates about the gap between how dangerous a situation actually is and how dangerous it feels when you're in the middle of it and still broadcasting. In 2020, someone posted a thread to the Reddit community r/found footage asking a simple enough question: whether there were any found footage videos out there that might actually be real, rather than the kind of carefully constructed horror content that gets passed off as genuine. The thread didn't attract much attention at the time, pulling in around 16 upvotes before settling into the quiet obscurity that most posts on that platform eventually find. It sat there for nearly 2 years without generating anything worth noting. Then a user going by the name That Horse Head Guy showed up and posted a single line that shifted the entire direction of the thread. He asked whether anyone had considered physical VHS tapes and whether anyone had come across something odd on one. When someone engaged with the question, his response was brief and immediate. "Oh yeah," he said, "I've got something for you." He posted a YouTube link to a channel called David Fun with Dolls. The person who clicked it first responded that they regretted doing so almost immediately, which is the kind of reaction that tends to make everyone else want to click it anyway. The channel itself is sparse and strange before a single video is even opened. 13 subscribers, 5 videos, and a banner that describes it as a special kind of blackjack. The second video on the page, titled simply, "Hi, I am David and this is Sally," was uploaded in 2019, and by the time the Reddit thread brought it to wider attention. The description lays out a set of rules for a game and introduces what David refers to as his dolls. What the footage actually shows is a man in a room surrounded by dolls, talking to them, explaining the rules of the game he is about to play with the kind of focused seriousness that suggests he has done this before and considers it genuinely important. Scattered around the room are buckets containing something that the person who later described the video chose to call mud, though the context that builds around the footage makes that a generous interpretation. At a certain point, David opens a drawer and produces a handheld blackjack 21 game, and from there, the structure of what he's doing becomes clear in a way that is deeply uncomfortable to follow. Every time he loses a hand and goes over 21, he uses the contents of those buckets on himself. The footage that exists publicly is heavily censored in any version that has been shared on mainstream platforms, because the original content is not something that can be shown without restriction. What gets through the censorship is enough to establish the general shape of what David has constructed in that room. The dolls, the game, the buckets, the rules, the Valentine's Day framing of the particular video that surfaces most often. And the overall impression is of something that took considerable time and planning to set up. That horsehead guy provided additional context when pressed in the Reddit thread. The tape had apparently come to a friend of his from a random hitchhiker, and it contained more than just David's footage. There was a separate short film on the same tape, titled Golden Afternoon, and then a section simply labeled to David. Most of the original tape had been destroyed over the years by people who watched it and made a deliberate decision to ensure it went no further. What survives is only a portion of what existed, and the portions that are gone were apparently more explicit about the game's rules, the significance of each doll, and the full extent of what David had prepared. Whether this is a deeply private fetish that found its way onto a VHS tape and eventually onto the internet, or some kind of performance art produced by someone operating well outside conventional boundaries, has never been conclusively answered. The person who brought it to wider attention noted that David appeared to have some kind of learning disability, which adds a layer of complexity to the question of how to think about what the footage represents and who is responsible for the fact that it exists at all. The channel remains active in the sense that it hasn't been taken down. Whether that means David is still out there somewhere, still playing his game with his dolls, is not something anyone who has looked into this has been able to confirm or rule out. On the morning of Good Friday, April 19th, 2019, an 87-year-old retired teacher named Terry Radford was standing near a bus stop on Worcester Avenue in Mansfield Woodhouse, doing nothing more than waiting for a bus the way he had done countless times before. He had spent years caring for his wife as she suffered through severe dementia, putting much of his own life on hold for the duration of that process, and she had passed away 7 months earlier. Terry had been slowly finding his way back to living again. He had 3 foreign holidays booked for later that year. He was standing at a bus stop on a Good Friday morning, and he had no way of knowing that a stolen car was tearing through the residential streets nearby, driven by a man who believed he was a descendant of God. Gavin Collins was 38 years old and had been released from prison less than 24 hours earlier under the home detention curfew scheme, a program that allows eligible inmates to serve the final portion of their sentence at home while being monitored. After completing most of his prison term, he walked out of the prison gates expecting to begin the difficult process of rebuilding his life. A friend arrived to collect him shortly after his release. Almost immediately, however, they noticed that something seemed off. Collins was speaking unusually, struggling to communicate clearly, and his behavior appeared confused and erratic. To his friend, it looked as though he might be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, even though there was no obvious explanation for the sudden change. The contrast between the man who had been released from custody and the one sitting in the car was striking, leaving those around him puzzled and concerned. As the day progressed, Collins' condition continued to deteriorate. His speech became increasingly disorganized, and his actions grew more unpredictable. What had initially seemed like an unusual episode was developing into something far more serious. Friends and family struggled to understand what was happening, unsure whether it was the result of a medical emergency, substance use, or an underlying mental health crisis. By the following morning, whatever had begun the previous day had fully taken hold. Collins was no longer behaving like himself, and his increasingly disturbed state suggested that the situation had escalated dramatically overnight. What started as subtle warning signs had rapidly developed into a severe and alarming episode, setting the stage for events that would soon have devastating consequences. Collins entered a neighbor's house, threw prescription medication across the floor, and began unplugging electrical items while claiming they were connected to the devil. He moved to another neighbor's house, stole car keys, and drove off into the streets of Nottinghamshire at the beginning of what would become a 30-minute rampage pieced together afterwards through dashcam footage recovered from the vehicles involved. The footage showed him driving recklessly through residential areas at high speed, screaming, ripping the rearview mirror from the windscreen and continuing to drive, behaving throughout as if he were engaged in something divine rather than something catastrophic. He crashed into a house in Skegby, the homeowner barely getting out of the way in time. Collins climbed out of the wreckage and demanded the owner's car keys, and when he refused, Collins forced his way into a woman's car who had stopped to see if anyone needed help, threw her out of it, and kept the car. That was his second stolen vehicle of the morning. He crashed that one too, then broke into a home where a mother and her 2 children were having breakfast, injured and bleeding from the wrecks, and drew crosses on the children's foreheads with his own blood before threatening their lives until the mother handed over her keys. That was the 3rd car, and it was the one he drove to Worcester Avenue. When he reached the bus stop where Terry Radford was waiting, he shifted into reverse and accelerated onto the pavement, crushing Terry against the bus shelter with fatal force. He stepped out of the car and announced that he had killed the devil. Police arrived, tasered Collins, and arrested him. The rampage had lasted approximately 30 minutes. 9 months later, he was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to life in prison, telling the jury during the trial that he had no memory of anything he had done that day. What the dashcam footage ultimately documented was not just a stolen car or a man in the grip of a psychotic episode. It documented a system failure, one that had overlooked the fact that while still incarcerated, Collins had been flagged as a risk of harm to others, had set fire to his cell on 2 separate occasions, and had attacked a staff member with a plastic knife. Those incidents should have prevented his early release. They were overlooked, and Terry Radford, who had spent years caring for someone he loved and was finally beginning to look forward to again, was killed, waiting for a bus on a Friday morning because of it. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania carries the kind of history that settles into the ground and stays there. Over 3 days in July 1863, the largest battle ever fought on North American soil took place across those fields and ridgelines, leaving more than 50,000 casualties in its wake and marking the moment the tide of the American Civil War began turning decisively against the Confederacy. General Robert E. Lee's forces were decimated across those 3 days and forced to retreat, and the ground they fought and died on has never quite shed the weight of what happened there. People who visit the battlefield regularly describe a feeling that is difficult to articulate, something that goes beyond the historical significance of the place and into something more atmospheric, more present, as if the land itself remembers what it absorbed. In 2012, a video surfaced that gave that feeling a great deal more to work with. The clip, titled simply Gettysburg Wheatfield Fife and Drums, was recorded around sundown by a woman who was visiting the battlefield that evening with her daughter. She was using her daughter's video camera for the first time and had no particular agenda beyond documenting a visit to a historically significant site. She later explained all of this in the comments section of the video, identifying herself as a nurse and making clear that she had no interest in misleading anyone. She wasn't labeling the footage paranormal, she said, simply because she hadn't found an explanation for it. And in the absence of an explanation, she preferred to present what the camera had captured and let people reach their own conclusions. What the camera captured was the sound of fife and drums. It began quietly enough, drifting across the wheat field as the lights started dropping, and the woman and her daughter initially assumed they were hearing reenactors somewhere nearby. Gettysburg hosts historical reenactments regularly, and the sound of period military music is not inherently unusual in that context. They began walking toward the source, expecting to find a group of performers behind the next cluster of trees, and found nothing. They kept walking. The sound stayed ahead of them, always just beyond wherever they were standing, moving in a way that suggested a procession or a march rather than a stationary performance. After 30 minutes of following it through the darkening battlefield, having checked behind every tree line they came across and found no one, the certainty that there was a rational explanation behind the next tree began to erode. The video was verified to the extent that it could be. The location was confirmed on Google Maps, and behind the tree line visible in the footage, there are no buildings, no staging areas, no infrastructure that would support a musical performance. The fact that this was happening at night only deepens the problem, since reenactments at Gettysburg are not typically conducted after dark. As the sun continued to go down in the footage, the drums grew louder rather than fading, and the quality of the sound shifted in a way that made it seem less like something being performed at a distance and more like something moving closer, as if whatever was producing that sound was marching toward the camera rather than away from it. The woman never found a source. She never saw a single person across 30 minutes of walking through a battlefield where the sound of a military march was clearly and consistently audible. She went home without an explanation and uploaded the footage because she didn't know what else to do with it. That video alone would be enough to make Gettysburg one of the more unsettling locations in American paranormal footage. But it isn't the only clip from that battlefield that has attracted serious attention. A second piece of footage, recorded by a different visitor on a different occasion, captured something that a significant number of people consider to be among the most convincing paranormal footage ever filmed. The clip shows lights or shapes visible among the trees on the battlefield at night, small, flickering, appearing and disappearing in a way that the people recording it couldn't attribute to motorcycles, other visitors, or anything else present in the environment. They can be heard trying to explain it to each other in real time, pointing, moving the camera, checking whether they're seeing the same thing, and arriving at no conclusion. There is nobody visible in the tree line. There is nothing that should be producing what the camera is picking up. When you consider how many thousands of men died on that ground and how they died, charging across open fields, falling in the wheat field, bleeding out in the July heat over 3 of the longest days in American military history, the question of what those lights might represent becomes one that is harder to set aside than it might be in almost any other location on Earth. Gettysburg has been generating stories like these for as long as people have been visiting it after dark, and the footage that has emerged from that battlefield over the years suggests that whatever remains out there among those trees and fields, it has no particular interest in staying hidden.